Hey there, peeps. Today I was mulling over as I'm continuing to think through fractal productivity, the systems I'm trying to create. A couple of things, two topics I wanted to talk about that I'm mulling over. One is Frank Gilbreth. If you've ever seen the old movie Cheaper by the Dozen, not the new one that came out in the last 10 years or so, but there's an old one from maybe the 50s or 60s or something. It talks about it's a memoir of a daughter about her family, but kind of focused on her dad, who's Frank Gilbreth, who was a time study expert. So factories would hire him. Check out the lighting. The sun's bright today. Factories would hire him to come in, observe, and identify places where they could save time in processes. And so what he would do is he would go in, talk to the department manager and say, I need to go and watch the laziest person in the factory who hasn't been fired. And often there would be kind of an obvious candidate for the person who always seems to be finding the easiest way to do things, and it comes across as lazy. He said, actually, no, those are the people who have done my work for me. They've figured out the easiest, least energy consuming ways to do the jobs. And so what we need to do is actually learn from them, and that's where we're going to find our motion studies. So he would just go and watch this guy, and then he would contrast it with other people, and he would see that the other people were doing like 7 extra steps, whereas the quote lazy guy would move the tools closer so he wouldn't have to walk as far, and that kind of thing. But that's got me thinking, I'm creating systems specifically for myself, and I have very particular characteristics, not to say strange characteristics. But if I create systems for someone who's not me, for like an idealized me, who's like always super motivated, super energetic, and super smart, this future version of myself that I imagine, who's all the things I'm not, that's a pretty poor system I've created, because it's not, number one, it won't work for the real me, because the present me, the future me, is just me. After some time goes by, I'm not going to be any different. As much as I imagine I'll be super energetic, but that's never worked. And so really the focus of fractal productivity is analyzing my systems and seeing how they're for a person that doesn't exist, like a me that is smarter, faster, and wiser and less tired and less stressed and less frustrated. So it's really trying to create systems for me as I am now. And I'm typically stressed. I'm typically tired because I don't get much sleep. So that's a piece of it. I'm trying to move away from creating systems for some kind of more perfect version of myself. So that's one thing. Making sure I'm in the right place. The other thing is the idea of artificial constraints in a system. If you can create I'll say it for myself, if I can create artificial constraints in a system that replicate actual constraints in the future, I will be able to solve real problems that are really going to come up. And so, for example, a constraint in a system is I can't create a system for someone who's not tired, because I'm tired pretty much 100% of the time. I'm a Clark, and Clarks don't sleep much for whatever reason. I am in the wrong place. Dang it. So I've got to create system for someone who's going to be tired next week, and I have to take that into account. I have to, for myself, I have to take into account the fact that I'm an extreme divergent thinker. And so I have to create systems for a divergent thinker, not a convergent thinker. And so the system has to replace what for some people who are more convergent in their thinking, has to replace some of the tools that they would automatically not need or would internally produce in their own thoughts. And so an artificial constraint, though, is a way of focusing. I was pondering that as I was thinking about the systems, and this, all kinds of examples came to mind, but this one example, years ago, Gracie and I didn't have much money at all. I mean, we were out of money, but it was Valentine's Day, and Gracie and I always try and do something that's fun and, you know, relationally enjoyable together. And we're not go to a restaurant on Valentine's Day kind of people, because the restaurants are so packed, and we didn't have money. So I was like, well, whatever we're gonna do, let's use $20. Let's set aside $20 in our budget for Valentine's Day. And then so it was an artificial constraint. We in theory could have spent more money, but by placing that constraint on, we had the best Valentine's Day. We ended up so many things fell together in a strange serendipitous way. So it's not necessarily duplicatable, but it was because we had put that constraint in the system that we were looking for opportunities. So we ended up having this crazy great, like one of the best dates of our lives. And I can't remember what somebody offered us. They had symphony tickets, and Grace and I love classical music, so they had symphony tickets to the Huntsville Symphony Orchestra, and they gave that to us. So that was like $120 or whatever. That was just given to us for free. So that's a little bit unusual. But then we ended up creating this outdoor little bistro cafe table set up, and we made all this food, and we had candles, and we just set it up at this random place in the middle of Huntsville, in this little it's not exactly a park, but it's just kind of off of a sidewalk. And it was hilarious. People were walking by looking at us over there eating with our candlelit dinner, and we just had this great time. But it was primarily because we had introduced a constraint that focused our attention. And it's like, you know, if we're trying to decide, you know, what to give for gifts for Christmas, if we just sit down and say, what do we want to give for gifts, it's like this infinite possibilities. It's hard to decide, it's hard to think through. But if we just introduce an artificial constraint into that system, it creates focus. So if we say, okay, our focus is going to be books, let's start with books, and or it could be anything. We could pick a color or whatever, and by introducing that constraint into the system, it focuses our attention. So that's one of the things. I won't belabor that point, but in the system I'm trying to create, placing constraints in front of a situation. So in other words, don't let the situation develop and then have to produce. Introduce a constraint as it applies to some upcoming situation before you get there, allows you to focus in a certain way on the situation. So that's going to be another kind of mental model I'm pondering, and that's kind of where I'm at in the process. Now I've got to go in and pick up some wall paint and some ceiling paint. So I'm going to let you guys go.